What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And it's not just a tagline, we deliver, and you'll know why after you've watched this very episode you are viewing right now. Of course, as we know by now, Alec Murdoch is a convicted killer. He went from prominent attorney to convicted killer. And now in his wake, there are a growing number of questions. One of them, will Stephen Smith's death be solved? That has been in the news all week. We'll get into that. Also, will Buster Murdaugh be given his privacy? And so much more. Best guest here to discuss all of this. You probably know his face from TV and the Netflix doc and so many other things. He is Hampton County native Michael M. DeWitt Jr. He is a multiple award-winning journalist and longtime editor of the 143-year-old the Hampton County Guardian. DeWitt's boots-on-the-ground coverage of the Murdoch crime saga has been published in print and online around Gannett's nationwide USA Today network, and he has appeared on ABC's 2020, CBS's 48 Hours, Dateline NBC, and as I just mentioned, the Netflix documentaries to discuss this very case regarding Alec Murdoch. Sarah Ford, in the florally looking blouse, has served as legal director at the South Carolina Victim Assistance Network since 2017, where she leads a team of attorneys and advocates to provide direct legal services to South Carolina crime victims. She is a former South Carolina prosecutor. And most importantly, she hosts the podcast Palmetto Prime Time, anywhere you get your podcasts. And now I know why I can't read because I don't have my glasses. Amy Zimmercheck is the owner of the AJZ Law Firm, LLC, focusing on criminal defense, PCRs, and plaintiffs' cases in both state and federal courts. She's been voted as a member of Super Lawyers continuously since 2019. She's had over 10 not guilties on felony cases, including murder and rape since 2009. Last but not least, the man with the grandfather clock over his left shoulder, Stephen Peterson, was a senior special agent of the United States Department of Justice for nearly 3 decades, and at the time of his retirement was the most senior DEA street agent in the world. He's now a South Carolina private investigator working for Stephen Smith's family. We'll get into that as well, and was also featured in the Netflix series about the Murdoch murders. Couple quick notes. Of course, as usual, please follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. You can also find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please, if you're listening to the podcast, leave us a nice rating on the audio platforms. It helps us a lot. And you can support us at Patreon as well as become a YouTube member. Without further ado, Michael, to you first here. I think I read that your family has been in Hampton County for something like 300 years. Now that the trial of the century is over, what do you think its long-lasting impact will be?
There's a lot of hurt in this community, a lot of mistrust. Two of the most prominent families in our community, members of those families were involved in this. The icons, if you will, of our legal system and our banking system here in Hampton County. People that everyone trusted and looked up to. There are going to be a lot more to come with the financial crimes and all of that. But right now, there are still some families out there that are waiting for answers and waiting for justice, and they can't even begin to heal until they get some closure.
And Sarah, same question to you. You guys are born and bred, living in South Carolina. What do you think the lasting impact of this whole saga will be, Sarah?
I think it's too soon to tell, Joel. I mean, we've just completed one piece of this extremely large puzzle. And I think that, there are so many people, like Michael said, that there is so much out there that we still don't know, that we still don't understand. There are so many additional trials that are going to have to happen. And I think that, the investigation is still kind of ongoing with SLED. I think that this case has a lot of tentacles. And I think that we're not even fully aware of where it's all going to go. But I do know that, growing up in a small town, just about 40 miles from there, I get it. I understand it. It's really difficult. And I really hope that, the community in Hampton County can begin to get some closure, but I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon with the financial trials that we're going to expect soon.
And Michael, did you know Alec personally prior to all this?
I did. If you are involved in any kind of social or civic life in Hampton County, you know the Murdaughs. Everybody knew the Murdaughs, but I've had an opportunity to cover the family for the 20 years I've been with the paper. In fact, I told someone the other day, the last murder trial that I covered from start to finish, the prosecutor was Alex's father. And yeah, I'm familiar with his family. I went to school with his younger brother, and his mother taught me in school. So this family is well known and well immersed in the community.
And what was it like for you personally when this all started to develop, and then obviously when he went on trial for these heinous murders and then the conviction? I mean, personally, was it jarring? Was it eerie, upsetting, all those things?
The financial allegations weren't so shocking. I mean, we always had a little suspicion that to use a common word, that we always felt Alex was a little shady. You just get a vibe about people, but it's not something you necessarily vocalize. You don't have any evidence. You just get a vibe about someone. And so I wasn't shocked, and I don't think too many people were shocked when we found out that he was stealing from clients and things of that nature. We were shocked by the magnitude of it. What really shocked everyone was the homicides and the fact that he was accused of killing his own son, even more than killing his spouse. As you know, domestic violence is quite common. At one time, unfortunate and tragic, but common. At one time, South Carolina led the nation in terms of women killed by men. So to imagine that, and in the picture, him being charged with killing his own son, what I know of the Murdoch family, they value family. They love family. That family name means something to them, and they're a tight-knit group, tight-knit clan. And that was shocking, and that was hard to imagine for me and for most local people.
We'll swing back around on that. I'll ask you about what you think the motive is, but let's get through some comments here. Laura writes, "Hello, everyone from Toronto, Canada. Happy to be here. I found you, Joel, during the Murdoch trial, and I'm thrilled that I did. Love your channel. Hello from South Louisiana. What's up, Tim? Hey, everyone from East Tennessee. Just found this channel a couple weeks ago and love it. We hope you stick around to Washington State, to one of our show favorites here, Papa Bear from Moscow, Idaho, the epicenter of that horrendous quadruple homicide at the University of Idaho. And then my name favorite out of STS Nation, Shaquille Oatmeal. Hello to the best show on YouTube. Thank you. Jody Johnston, friend of the show. Hello from Virginia. Amy, to you. You're representing Cousin Eddie. There was all this talk about would he testify, wouldn't he testify? How is Cousin Eddie doing today?
Well, he's not doing great. He's still incarcerated, but things are moving. I'm not really at liberty to speak about kind of what the discussions are, but he's certainly ready to not be incarcerated.
And what was his reaction? I'm sure you talked to him since about the conviction.
He was not surprised
at all.
At all.
C. Griffin writes, "Hello from Boise, Idaho." And Amy, you're obviously Boise, Idaho, of course, where the Lori Vallow Daybell trial is about to happen. We're covering that. And today the death penalty was taken off the table. Some people are chiming in with comments about that. Julie Frew, I love this. She writes, our little STS Nation will not be knocked down by Karen's or Brad's. Brad is a guy that gave us 1 star. We're going after him. Not because he went after me, but he went after STS Nation. Called them the D word, which rhymes with rum. Anyway, Steve, you're the only, and you're muted here, Steve. You're the only non-native. You're a Bostonian. You can hear it in the accent, but so you're sort of the outsider. What was your take, or what is your take now in the wake of this conviction on this double homicide here for Alec Murdaugh?
Well, I'm a Bostonian by birth, but I've spent the last 40 years south of the Mason-Dixon line. So I've lived in the South longer than I lived in the North. And, I didn't know any of these people. I didn't know any of the families. I was not familiar with the name. I've only lived in Charlestown about 6 years now, coming up, I guess, 7 years. So I wasn't that familiar with anybody until the murder of Paul and Maggie. And that's when I was introduced to the circus. And it really became a circus when you think about it. And all these deaths that seemed to somehow be involved with the family, whether they truly were or not, they all suspicious, all involved. And while everybody makes fun of the South and the good old boy network and so forth, that type of system exists everywhere. It exists in the Northeast, in the Midwest, in the South. It's everywhere. We've always said it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's always what's mattered. And, you're seeing it in New York City play out right now with the DA going after Trump. People have agendas. And so people pursue things, or people don't pursue things based on who they are and what their agendas are. So I didn't find it that surprising. What I found surprising was a jury was able to see through the BS, because after Casey Anthony, I had lost total faith in all juries. I've always said that a jury is nothing but 12 people too stupid to get out of jury duty. And I just didn't think that they could see through the BS and come back with a conviction. I'm incredibly impressed. I'm very proud of it. It brought me back, gave my faith back in humanity. So I'm happy in that respect.
I'm happy to hear that. I could hear the cynicism. I thought Sarah Ford was going to jump out of her chair, but she remained calm. I love it. Jessica writes, Joel, my 5 stars on Apple officially. Haters gonna hate. Thank you so much. I love that. I appreciate that. Tracy Jones, tucked up in bed, listening from the UK. I love it. Over to Laura Sanders Realty. Yay, I got a live. Love you all. Love you back. Texas in the house. Laura Lynn Lulu is here. So Michael, back to you. I mean, a very little bit of time has passed. The question no one really knows the answer to, and I don't suspect you do, but you have any thoughts on why Alec Murdaugh decided to commit this heinous pair of murders and obviously take out his own son? Any clarity at all on motive here?
When the charges were first announced, I was skeptical of him pulling the trigger with his own son, and a lot of people were. We felt like they were dead because of Alex. We felt like they were maybe something he was involved in, the whole gang drug thing. I've heard theories that he owed somebody money, or he crossed somebody, and or more recently, and even up to the beginning of the trial, one of my theories was, okay, he killed Maggie and somebody else killed his son. There's no way he could have possibly pulled the trigger and killed his own son. And I was skeptical of the Attorney General's motive. If you thought about it, on one hand, it made sense. On the other, it's it's a far leap, you know. But as the case progressed, and as I came to know more evidence, and the circumstances leading up to June 7th, as we came to know more about Alex Murdaugh's personality and his drug addiction, the motive makes perfect sense to me. It was a combination of his personality. I don't know if you would call it sociopathic or psychopathic, but a combination of his personality, where truly he only cared about himself, kind of his morality kind of dulled by drug use and abuse, combined with that motive. He was confronted on June 7th about missing stolen legal fees. He had a big hearing coming up for the boat case, and he's a personal injury lawyer. He knows that if the world, which would include the jury pool, sees him as the victim of vigilantes, Mark Tinsley said so on the stand. This boat case goes away. If he's a victim, no jury is going to, make Alex Murdaugh pay a bunch of money if his family's dead. And yeah, by the end of the trial, I was very much like the jury. I very much believe he did it, and I very much believe that motive, coupled with drug abuse and his own personality, makes perfect sense to me.
Lindsay Shea writes, Steve, this one's for me and you. Hi, all. Jersey girl living in Quincy, Mass. She covers all the bases. Followed by Tina, hello from Germany. And then this one right here, Ava Riley. Is that cousin Eddie's lawyer on the top right? It sure is. That is Amy Zimmercheck. Amy, to you, have you given any more thought to motive? The why is really the question that hasn't been answered. Any thoughts on it further? Any further thoughts on it now that some time has passed?
I still don't think that we have the real why. I do think that he had planned this for quite some time. I think that discounting what Paul was doing to the family name, that was bad. And it's just so, hard to not know. I think we started off talking about Sandy Smith and, them wanting to do all that, exhumation and private autopsy because they want to know, and I think that's probably one of the most frustrating aspects of doing these criminal cases, especially when we didn't get the investigation that we should have in any of the cases. I think that it makes it incredibly frustrating to not know. But the thing that we do know about Alec is that you never got what you saw. I mean, he used and manipulated everyone around him. So, I don't know that it's possible.
And Marina chiming in from Spain. We're all watching Quality Conversation while so many are getting riled up by their TV with so much nonsense in the form of empty sound bites. No empty sound bites here. We let our guests talk. Steve, to you, obviously you were a DEA agent for many, many, many years. You've learned how to read people, especially bad guys. Now that a few weeks have passed, any more thoughts on why? Why did he do this? You got to unmute yourself.
I'm trying to be polite because my grandfather clock apparently is still bonging in the background. So I've been muting. But, why did he do it? I believe he did it because, for a couple of reasons. One was Paul was a major liability to his name, to the family, and to Alex's pocketbook. Paul is a huge liability. I believe Paul inadvertently struck Gloria Satterfield and caused her death. She fell down the stairs, hit her head, went into the hospital, and died a few weeks later. I believe Paul was the source of that. I believe that because Alex commits perjury by testifying in a deposition that he was there when Gloria's on the ground and Gloria tells him she tripped over the dogs. He wasn't there. That never happened. He was already controlling the narrative. He was already planting the seed for everybody to believe this is the reason. He's protecting Paul. He's protecting his family. He did the exact same thing later on with the beaches, at the hospital, with all the other people. He's trying to control the narrative, trying to control the statements that are out there. Now the house of cards is falling down. And as the house collapses, he finds out that his law firm is onto his stealing. And that's been going on for years and years and years. So all these things are hitting him all at once. And I think he just snapped. I don't believe this addiction problem, $50,000 worth of oxys or hydrocodone a day. I don't believe that for a second. I think he just freaked. He panicked. I don't know why he went after Maggie. I don't know that. Well, we're trying to make sense out of nonsense. And it's pretty tough to do that. But I believe all this stuff came to a head. He figured, just as Tinsley had testified, if he could prove, if he could show, and I think he planned on, his goal was to pin it all on Cousin Eddie. And I think if he could plan that, if he could get that out, if he could play with that, everybody would feel so sorry for Alex. They would overlook everything else. And once again, he'd get away with it.
And Amy, Amy, to you, Cousin Eddie better than anyone. Does he agree with Steve that Alec was ultimately trying to pin the blame on him for all this?
Well, I think obviously what he believes now is a lot different than what he believed at the time. But what he believes now is what I've believed all along, which is I have no doubt that Alec lured him out to the side of the road to kill him and pin every little bit of this on him, and all of his troubles would have been gone.
Yep.
Sandra D writes, watching from Sicily, Italy. I never miss an episode. We should do a couple of lives in Sicily. Shout out to one of my favorite shows, White Lotus. Second season took place there. Baby Doll. Love STS Nation. To Julie Frew. I love that Michael is here. Michael, Stephen Smith. Let's get into this. 2015. I assume you were on this from the very beginning. When did you first learn of it? Did you think it was a hit and run? Have you changed your opinion since then?
Okay, great. And are we allowed to circle back later and disagree with the fellow guest about anything?
You could do that right now. This is your show. Whenever you want.
No. And respectfully disagree. I just want to.
Let's do that. Let's do that now. What are you respectfully disagreeing with?
Well, I like to couple what Amy was saying. I think Paul was a problem, and he did, begin the downfall of this family name.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's why he was killed. I think it made it easier to kill him. Paul, the damage was already done. Paul had already done with this boat crash case, other than financial damage, the veneer had been stripped off the gilded Murdoch legacy. That family name couldn't go through the ringer anymore by Paul's actions. The only liability was going to be in the form of millions of dollars in the crash. And to respectfully disagree with Stephen, we don't have any evidence that there was any foul play in Gloria's death. Her own attorneys and her own family have told me they don't think she was pushed. They think it was merely an accident. But what Alex did, if you look at all the evidence and look at the financial crimes and all that, he sprang into action because he saw a way to make money off her death. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he lied and said that he was there and she tripped over dogs, all of that is to fit the criteria for the insurance. If she had fallen in the course of her job, for example, that might have fallen under workers' comp. He was trying to steer that narrative. Stephen was right about that. He was trying to steer the narrative, but he was trying to do it in a way that the insurance would pay off. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was covering for Paul. Paul was not the perfect young man, but from what we've seen and heard, Gloria was almost like a mother to him. I'm not saying it wouldn't be possible for him to do something in a fit of rage, but we don't have any evidence that he pushed Gloria. And I think with so many rumors going around, it's probably, we can speculate a lot, but it's probably important to stick to the evidence as much as possible. So there's my respectful dissertation.
I can't listen. I can't fault your logic at all. It's totally logical. My belief is based on Paul's reaction to other people as well. I know he cared for Gloria. I don't believe for a second he intended to injure Gloria. I believe he just erupted and pushed her. She tripped and fell. I don't believe that was the intent by any means. But I mean, if you talk to, I've interviewed enough people around there who said he was a great kid, but he had a temper that would snap like that. And he would become angry. He hit his girlfriend, right? One even of the caretakers of the Moselle property said, I saw his temper. He erupted illogically. And when he did it, he was violent and snapped. He would regain himself if he was sober. He would regain control quickly. But so that's, then you put in the Alex narrative. And I think half of it was to get the money. But I think the other half was to steer any suspicion away from Paul. I could be completely wrong. I could be. It's just a theory. But I stick with it.
Linda Feldman writes, did I miss something about the drug usage for Alec? Was it decided that he never was using drugs? Was the so-called rehab ever discovered or discussed? Michael, do you know anything about this? Because we've asked Steve, who just responded to you. He is a former DEA agent. Said there's no way in hell $50,000 a week on Oxy was happening and you'd still be alive. So do we know anything about the extent of his actual drug usage?
He had a pill problem, but as with everything with Alex, everything is exaggerated. Everything is a lie. There's just no way that you could use. He testified about how many thousands of milligrams of drugs he was taking. And like Creighton Waters, stated during the trial, is that even survivable? If you look at the what drugs cost and how many drugs a healthy person can take, there's no way he was using that kind of pills and that frequency. I think that he might have been spending $50,000 a week, which is doubtful. But if he was doing that, he was buying drugs to sell. And one theory I've had is that was a form of untaxed, unknown revenue. If you go out and steal 50 grand from a client, you can buy some drugs and turn that 50 grand into 200 grand or $250,000 or whatever drugs mark up for. So I think it was a way to double his money and launder that money. In the wake of the boat crash, every dollar he could raise and hide from the law firm and hide from Mark Tinsley, he was trying to do it. And I think that 50 grand, if he did spend 50 grand, he was doing it to make money. He wasn't ingesting 50 grand worth of drugs.
I hope not for his sake, but he may hope so, because he wouldn't be here right now. He wouldn't be sitting in prison. Kim, thank you to you becoming a YouTube member. Followed up here by Rose Shiflett. Hey, SCS Nation, best true crime show on YouTube. Let's not forget that it takes a special kind of evil for someone to blow his son's brains out. That is next level crazy, and it is coming to you from someone who is the father of a young son. Completely inexplicable to a normal, and I'm not that normal, but to a somewhat normal human being. Sarah, you are now hosting the super successful Palmetto Primetime podcast. You do it on both YouTube and wherever you listen to audio. What are you getting lingering questions on the show, and what are the big ones? What are people coming to you for there and asking you about?
I think a lot of people are still very confused about the dynamic or the motive. And that's just something that we've all said, but you can't you can't rationalize the irrational. And I think a lot of people like to think about domestic violence as being simply between a husband and a wife or partners, but that's not correct. It's a familial issue. So I think it's important for us to talk about that. And I do want to push back a little bit on something Michael said. It is not uncommon for parents to kill their kids. We want to think that, but it's not. The statistics tell us that 500-600 kids a year in the United States are killed by their parents. And that's a lot of kids. Those are a lot of families that are affected by this. And when you're looking at someone who had their entire world starting to crumble, not just because of Paul and the boat accident, but because Alec Murdaugh's own actions, his theft, him stealing from his clients, the most vulnerable, the vulnerable, his world, he's the one that started this entire thing from crumbling. So I think that it's really important for us to we're not going to always know the answers. We can speculate from now until kingdom come, but we're not going to have the answers. And I just want to make sure that people understand, because it's so important to me, and domestic violence is such a huge issue, that it is not necessarily just partner. It is familial, and it's not necessarily rare that parents would harm or even kill their kids. So.
Missy Royal writes, there's literally no evidence Paul pushed Gloria down the stairs or anyone else. Her family has Eric Bland have said they do not suspect foul play in her death, to back up what Michael's been saying as well. Michael, we were kind of circling toward Stephen Smith and then got derailed for a moment. So back to you on Stephen Smith. When did you start covering this, and have your thoughts on this whole notion of a hit and run changed? And then we'll get into what the mother is saying.
Thank you. And it was me who derailed it, so my apologies.
All good.
We've been covering the Stephen Smith case since it happened in 2015, and we appealed to the community for information, for answers. We did a couple of front page stories. We did a couple of really big stories. Thanksgiving week of 2015, we did a front page story coupled with a front page editorial. And as you know, most newspapers, it's usually not policy to put an editorial on the front page, but I kind of broke the rules a little bit. And I got my reporter, Matt Popovich, to write the story. And I think Matt wrote the editorial. And basically we said that Sandy Smith had heard the same rumors we were hearing, that it was a classmate or classmates of Stephen, members from prominent families or a prominent family. And she pleaded with the community, please, we need answers. We want justice. And we're at the time, now we are the Hampton County Guardian is part of the USA Today network. And I've got great support from my team, and the stories here from Hampton are now amplified at a national level. But at the time, we belonged to a different newspaper organization, still, great company. But at the time, we were very much a small weekly community newspaper without the national support that we have now and the national stage that we have now. So our pleas just didn't gain traction. We were, at a small country weekly paper. Hampton County wasn't ready to react. The world at the time didn't know Stephen Smith existed, didn't know we existed, didn't care. So it very quickly became a cold case. And being a small newspaper, at the time I had one reporter, and then that quickly became just me. I've been a newsroom of one for the past few years. And so it's very hard for a small newspaper to do real investigative journalism and follow one story from start to finish. So much to my regret, this kind of fell off the radar for everybody for a while until the boat crash happened.
And Michael and I are living parallel lives, although I've got my chief marketing officer, my wife, and the great Steve Cohen helping me on this podcast, because can't go it alone. Meanwhile, Jen writes, can we talk about Buster after losing his family, being persecuted by the public based on rumors? We are going to get into that, and I'm glad you brought it up. Buster's getting a bad rap. We will get to that, and we'll let the panel weigh in as well. And then Look at this show. We get comments with the names in Hebrew. Amy Z, to you. Why do you think he didn't kill Buster as well? And then we're getting back to Stephen Smith. Why didn't he call him to come to the house that night? Have you ever pondered this question?
No, Buster really was living a separate, I mean, even though he's in his 20s, a separate kind of grown up life. He had a girlfriend. He worked in York County, which is all the way at the top of the state towards North Carolina. It like borders North Carolina. He really had started to enter that more independent phase of his life. And also he hasn't, aside from getting expelled from law school, which nobody really knew about until all of this came about. He hasn't really brought that much shame onto the family name, and they were working to pay to get him back into law school. So, he really wasn't causing problems for the family or the family name. And in fact, was kind of the next generation of, lawyers, leader kind of, to carry on exactly what the family had been doing this whole time. And so, I don't ever think that crossed his mind at all.
La Lee. STS Nation, this truly is a great show, great guest, and intelligent conversation, followed here by a friend of the show, J. Thomas Reset. Y'all are still assuming Alec killed his wife's son with his own hands. I disagree. No direct evidence, none. Terrible investigation. Signed, Devil's Advocate. We can all agree to disagree, but he is sitting in prison for these crimes, one way or the other. So that is how it goes. J. Thomas Reset, and say hello to your wife. So, Michael, to you, 7 years ago, he's struck, according to reports, struck by this car and killed. Sandy Smith, because of the high-profile nature of the Alec Murdoch trial, was very quickly after the conviction, post-conviction, from what I understand, able to raise close to $70,000 to fund this independent exhumation and autopsy for her son, and it is now going to happen. What can you tell us about this impending exhumation and how this will all play out in the coming days and weeks?
Sandy was able to raise a good bit of money very quickly within the first week after the trial, or within the first week of launching the GoFundMe page. They raised $60,000, I think, and it's over 70 now. But I think the most important thing she's done is, and no discredit to any other attorneys that she's had, but if you want someone who's going to fight for your case and your client, she has hired the right people. Eric Bland, he knows how to use the media. He knows how to, he's all about talking to the public, but he does it for his clients. And if you wanted somebody who will fight for you, you hire Eric Bland. And if you don't get answers, you're gonna make a lot of noise in the meantime. And so I think that's the most important thing they did. And
Eric Bland, I hope you're healing up. I'll tell you how he uses the media well. He does interviews from his hospital bed hours after getting a complete and total knee replacement. But hope you're doing well, Eric. Every time I read that, I feel your pain, literally, but I laugh at the amount of pain women go through, because my wife would be yelling at me if I was whining about my knee pain. She'd say, I gave birth. My mother would say the same thing. Sandy Smith, Sarah Ford, is quoted as saying, I could not have imagined when we began this fundraiser, this GoFundMe for the exhumation, that it would take off the way it did. Thank you for not allowing Stephen's story to be swept under a rug. We will pursue the exhumation immediately and provide updates along the way. Do you fear that if it wasn't for this Alec Murdoch trial, we would never get an answer as to what actually happened to Stephen Smith? And it's possible we still might not, I guess.
Sure, it's possible. But I tend to be an optimist, Joel. I tend to think that, things will rise to the top. And I am very heartened by the outpouring of support for Sandy Smith with this GoFundMe fundraiser. It's a lot of money to exhume a body, to get folks to do that, to work on that, investigators. It's probably going to be well over $60,000-$70,000 that she's got. And it's really disappointing because the first autopsy that was done came back and said that it was, a hit and run, that it was not a homicide. And that's really, it's disappointing because the evidence that we've seen that's come out from this does not support that initial finding from that autopsy. And yet Sandy Smith is having to raise money to make sure this happens. So I'm very hopeful that she's able to get answers. I'm frustrated that sometimes a high profile case that the names have been floated seemingly just by rumor has helped support her cause. I hate that for her because Stephen Smith, his life mattered. Sandy Smith deserves answers. And it shouldn't take a high profile case that captured the nation for, 6, 7, 8 weeks to get momentum going. But whatever it is that caused that, I'm happy for Sandy, and I really am hopeful for her and for answers for everyone.
And Jody writes, Susan, but you meant to say Sarah Ford is so right. Parents are killing their children more and more. It is awful. I don't know about the more and more, but I know it's been happening since the beginning of time, and it is a hideous, heinous crime. New subscriber. Love you. Yes, and Joel. It's a great show. Oh, thank you so much. Misunderstood. Like the name, too. So Ronnie Richter is Eric Bland's law partner. And Steve, this one's for you. He came out this week, says he is promising to untangle this web that is the Stephen Smith case. And I want to also ask you about Stephen Smith, since you were hired by the family as a private investigator. But this is his direct quote from Ronnie Richter. There were no skid marks around his body. There was no vehicular debris found. His loosely tied shoes were still on his feet. It is our job today to launch a new investigation into this death in the hopes of finding real answers. Your response to what he is saying?
I had two theories in Stephen's death. One involved the Murdaughs and some other people, and one that didn't. And initially, when I began investigating this, I was in conversations and cooperation with SLED. They were sharing information with me. Now, they weren't sharing 100% of their information with me, but I was sharing 100% of what I was finding with them. My job was to find out who killed Stephen so I could tell Sandy, this is what happened to your son. That's always been my goal. The murders, all this other stuff, it's all part of the circus. I don't care about any of that. When I was investigating or pursuing the two theories, the theory A being the Murdoch connection, theory B being others, the reason I pursued both theories is because each theory had their own holes. Each theory had unanswered questions. The SLED told me unequivocally they had evidence that Buster and Paul were not even in the county the day or the night that Stephen was killed. They told me that they could not find through telephone communication and exploitation, as well as internet and chat rooms and various things. They could not find a single connection between Stephen Smith and Buster Murdaugh. And the rumors were out there. There was full of rumors. Hell, when I got involved, it was 5 years after Stephen's death. There was nothing but rumors out there. So based on SLED's advice to me that there was no connection there, I didn't pursue theory one anymore. I pursued the second theory, which involved two individuals who had gotten blindly drunk, hit something in the road with their vehicle, they didn't know what it was, but they were terrified because they were young. They were going to get arrested for DUI. They fled the scene. The next morning when they woke up and sobered up, they went out there to find out what it was they did hit. And that's when they found out the road was shut down. Police were all there, and that Stephen had been hit and killed. Sure, no skid marks. Sure, shoes on the feet. A lot of interesting points there. A lot of holes in the story. But what I found fascinating initially was that Hampton County responded first with the coroner. And of course, the coroner's, and we even saw that in Alex's trial, the coroner is really a political position. They're not medical experts. So they went out there, the coroner and the assistant coroner went out there, and they determined it was a gunshot wound to Stephen's head. So based on that, they contacted SLED, and SLED came down to the investigation. They had also contacted the highway patrol because it was in the road, and people just automatically assumed it was a vehicle accident. So they contacted the highway patrol, and their MATE team, their designated accident investigative team, came out. But SLED told them to stand down. We got this. This is a murder. Well, when you see the autopsy photographs and you read through the reports, there was no gunshot wound. It didn't even look like a gunshot wound. But there was so much blood on the scene, I don't believe the body was killed somewhere. Stephen was killed somewhere else and placed in the road. I don't believe that there would be that much blood left. He would have bled out before he was placed where he was placed. But then you look at, well, if it's not murder, if the pathologist says this is not a gunshot, this is blunt force trauma, consistent with that of a motor vehicle strike. If you look at it that way, SLED said, we got nothing to do with this. It's not a murder, not guns. It's a car accident. We don't want it. They gave it back to the highway patrol. So highway patrol from day one pursued it as a murder. Highway patrol from day one said this was not a car accident. This was a murder. Well, now you got the guy, and listen, nothing against the highway patrol, but they're all accident guys. They know nothing about investigating murders. So this thing was handled so inappropriately. This was handled so incompetently, not intentionally, but just the people with the right knowledge were not handling this. I don't know why Hampton County did nothing. I don't know why SLED gave it back. Highway Patrol gave it up after 6 months. I don't know that they ever tried to interview Buster. I've listened to and read every interview they've done. I've interviewed several of the troopers that were there. And they didn't really know how to follow up. They didn't know what questions to ask. So when I got involved, one of the first things I wanted to do was talk to Buster. Let's put all these rumors to rest. But the lawyer said no, because I didn't get involved until Paul and Maggie were killed. Now we've got an open criminal investigation into the murder of Buster's mother and brother. We have an open criminal investigation into Stephen Smith. So it's SLED that tied Stephen in with the Murdaughs again. That's not rumors we created. That was SLED telling us there's something here. Otherwise, we're here at a Murdaugh murder. Why are we investigating Stephen Smith again? Hey, I'm grateful that the attention has come back to Stephen, so maybe Sandy can get some answers. I have told Sandy who I believe is responsible for the death of her son. I've given her the names. I sat down with her and I also told her, I don't think, this me, don't be surprised if you never see a criminal prosecution. We don't have any physical evidence. It's almost 8 years old now. So I don't know what they're going to prove, how they're going to prove it. Every time the case went from one agency to another agency, evidence was misplaced, evidence was lost, things fell through the cracks. So,
Stephen, what is your relationship with the family, with the Stephen Smith's family now? Are you working with them currently, or?
I spoke to Sandy the other day. With Sandy and I communicate I don't want to say frequently, but we do communicate. And she told me that she had hired Eric and now what she explained was it was only to handle exhuming Stephen's body. But her last lawyer, I was hired by Sandy's first lawyer. And then they had a disagreement. And you can say what you want, but I have tremendous respect for Andy Savage, the attorney who I worked for, who represented Sandy initially. And I think everything he did was correct. But Sandy wasn't expecting him to make a statement that he did. But this is not news to Sandy. I had sat down and explained to her, this is what I believe. And all Andy said was literally, we don't have any evidence right now that the Murdaughs are involved. For all we know, they may not be. And that just caused a fire because everybody around Sandy wanted the Murdaughs involved. They all have agendas to drag that family in. So for whatever reason, they parted ways. But I continued on because now it's my ego. Now I'm involved. I promised Sandy answers, and I'm not going to give up until I get the right answers. So I continued. But at this point, I've interviewed just about everybody I can interview. That SLED has come in behind me. They have adopted my theory on theory number 2. They've spoken to at least one of the 2 individuals. I believe they've spoken to both. They tried to polygraph one. Didn't work out. He didn't show up for the polygraph. I don't know to what extent they've continued. SLED and I have not spoken since Sandy departed company with her first lawyer. But her second lawyer did nothing. Never hired any investigators, never pursued any other leads. He did nothing to solve Stephen's mystery. So now is Eric going to do something? I have no idea. Maybe the autopsy will show something different. But really, what do we think it would show? Do we think it'll show a bullet? Is it going to show blunt force trauma with maybe a bat or a 2x4? Perhaps. Maybe the vehicle that struck him was already damaged. If the glass is broken out of the mirror already and he gets struck by a side view mirror on a pickup truck, there's not going to be any glass left because it's already missing. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I that's my best. And after interviewing the people that were there, that were involved, that drove that truck, I'm confident in my conclusion to Sandy Smith.
Maria Gutierrez writes, justice for Stephen Smith. Patty writes, Murdaugh, ? That is Steve Peterson's Boston.
My pronunciation.
You can't change Boston. You just let Boston be Boston. Amy Z, to you. Would you let Buster, if he was your client, speak to a guy like Steve Peterson who's investigating this, number one? And number two, have you dealt with a body being exhumed, and what can we expect from that?
So to answer your first question, it depends. I have let clients talk to police before, but that's after I've been able to see the evidence to make sure that they're not going to get tripped up on something. So it really just depends. And then to answer the second question, so it's interesting about the body exhumation. I've seen it twice before. I've never seen it where the family has had to pay for it. I know that, but that is common because exhumations are expensive. But certainly, South Carolina has a Victim Rights Act. I mean, it's a constitutional amendment, this Victim Rights Act. So I believe it's their right to be able to have an independent autopsy. Just like everything else in this case, though, I think it's just going to be incredibly frustrating. I did watch the press release where Richter was with Sandy, and he was promising, to do as much as a brand new, fresh investigation as that they could. But, much like every other shoddy investigation in this case, I mean, there's just so much time has passed, so many things are missed that, to have to go back and try to piece it all together. I still, I love that Sarah is optimistic. And I just, I just fear that there have been so many mistakes. And I think that, and I'll continue to say it. And I know that people, will probably come at me for it, but, SLED and their shoddy investigation in the double homicide, which I think was more than pointed out, they're never going to learn their lesson because they keep getting what they want. And it's, it's incredibly frustrating because that's not what justice is. That's not, if we had better cases, I would probably be able to convince more clients to accept responsibility for what they're guilty of. But it's not justice any way around when it's done poorly. And I just think that the amount of time that's passed and the incredibly poor investigations are going to be the biggest hindrance in this case.
And Sarah, to you say you're optimistic. Are you optimistic about this exhumation and what they might be able to find, and in terms of being able to solve this?
I think that they're going to be, you have to petition the court for an exhumation. I think that will be granted. I think that SLED, I'm just got an alert about that too. That SLED, Mark Keel is the chief of SLED, stating that he believes that this was not a hit and run. This was a murder. And that SLED is now, putting all of their attention on this case. I am hopeful.
And that's just breaking right now, Sarah. We see Leah Baker here. Breaking news: SLED Mark Keel states he believes Stephen Smith was murdered. So that is the head of SLED coming out.
I'm glad he's admitting this 8 years later.
Well, it's convenient, it's very convenient. And I think that what Amy has said is right on. I'm an optimistic person, but I'm also a realistic person. A case rarely gets better as time goes on. And so, I'm hopeful that there will be answers for Sandy's sake. That is very different than me saying that I think that there will be a successful prosecution in this case. Those are two very different things. So I hope that on some level that Sandy is able to get some answers. But do I see this case being successfully prosecuted 8 years later? I wouldn't take the odds on that. I wouldn't. But I'm very glad that SLED's now come out and saying that we're going after this because it matters. It very much matters. Stephen Smith was a gay kid in a southern town and deserves every bit of attention. The investigation was not what it needed to be, and I don't know why that was, but I'm glad that they're trying to correct that now. I don't think that's going to do a whole lot, but we'll see.
And no name for you, dang it, paid for this comment. Michael DeWitt fan club in the house, Michael. So you are loved near and far. Michael, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. So the head of SLED came out just now during this Surviving the Survivor podcast and says he believes that the Stephen Smith case is in fact a murder. Your response?
Not at all surprised. I just got that alert myself. So as soon as we get off, I guess I need to get to work doing my job. Not surprised, but I'm also concerned like the other panelists. This was a confused and shoddy investigation from the start. It's been 8 years. If we get an arrest, I highly doubt there'll be an arrest. If there is, I highly doubt there'll be a conviction. I'm pulling for justice. I really am. Of everyone even remotely connected to this whole crime saga, justice is coming slowly for everyone, but Sandy Smith and the Smith family are kind of out there on their own little island, and there's an island with no answers and no closure, no justice. And I'm deeply pulling for a positive outcome, but I'm kind of feeling like everyone else. It's going to be hard pressed to cover 8 years of ground when the case wasn't investigated that well from the start, and then to make a conviction. I think any lawyer could get somebody off on a case like this because there'd be no direct evidence unless there's something on somebody's cell phone. There's just no I'm hard pressed to see some direct evidence in this 8-year-old case, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I'm hoping I'm wrong. My wife says I'm wrong all the time, so I hope I'm wrong today.
And as we say in news, everyone here seems cautiously optimistic. Paula Steen writes, STS is my new sweet addiction. Always great guests, always great discussions. That's a great addiction to have. Just ask Steve Peterson. You don't want to be addicted to oxycodone. You want to be addicted to Surviving the Survivor. So that is a good thing, not a bad thing. Eric Bland writes, Eric Bland says, Steve, he was quoted, I think last night or today in the media, what we're going to do is start over. We're going to hire experts who are going to come into this case with a fresh set of eyes, with an open mind, without any preconceived conclusions, being objective, and wherever the facts go, that's where the investigation will go. Is that a little overly optimistic on Eric Bland's part, Steve?
I don't know that you can ever be overly optimistic. I'm cynical. I'm a cynical guy. That's just my nature. But I can tell you can hear the grandfather clock in the background. I can't do anything.
I love it. It's eerie.
Yeah, it kind of is. But I can tell you that, that was my theory from the beginning. And that was 5 years ago, right? 5 years after the murder. My theory was, what evidence do we have? But no one would share evidence with us, because by the time I was involved, it was a reopened criminal investigation. So SLED had announced, because of the murders, we're reopening. So when we asked for discovery, when we asked for information, when we requested copies of reports, we were stonewalled everywhere. We tried to speak to the pathologist who conducted the autopsy on Stephen. They wouldn't let us. We couldn't speak to her. So we were trying to do all these things. I don't know how Eric thinks he can do things differently, perhaps because of all the publicity. People now would be more willing to share, but nobody was willing to share. Nobody was. And when I was talking with SLED, when we were cooperating, I told them that, listen, in my world, I'm a Fed. We use grand juries all the time as investigative tools. Well, they don't use them that often in state cases. But they admitted that they had seated a grand jury to investigate the Murdaughs. And because Stephen Smith's case was reopened because of the Murdaughs, that this grand jury may also investigate Stephen. And I was like, that's what you have to do. You've got to put witnesses before the grand jury, lock in their testimony, because these kids at the time were 19, 20 years old, right? These were young kids at the time when Stephen was 19. So these kids are all about the same age. They've been keeping the secret for years, for at least 5 years. You grab a couple of the people that know things. Everybody knows something, but most of what they had, most of what I ended up chasing were rumors. Well, where did you hear this? I heard it from so-and-so. You go to so-and-so. Where'd you hear? Well, I heard it from Freddie. I heard it from Billy. I heard it from Karen. You know what I mean? You're playing this game. So I said, I narrowed it down to a list of witnesses that I gave to SLED. I said, put these guys before a grand jury. Lock in their testimony now. Then we can focus on disproving their lies. And somebody on the periphery will crack and say, I don't want to go down for the murder of Stephen. I'll tell you everything I know who's involved. Give me immunity. Give me a pass. And I think you would have found a DA that would have said, hey, there was a passenger in the backseat of the car. There's a passenger in the backseat of the truck. There was a passenger in the vehicle who wasn't aware of what happened, who didn't know that when they bashed Stephen's head in with an object, they never expected that. They didn't know it was going to happen. They weren't part of that. That's not what they signed up for. If somebody came forward like that and said, I saw this. This is what happened. I feel confident a DA would give that person a pass to convict the person with the object, to convict maybe the driver of the truck. Maybe Eric will have better luck. Maybe he'll be able to convince the prosecutors to do that too. Maybe Mark Keel will be more apt, if this grand jury is still seated, to do that. I don't know if they're going to open a separate grand jury for Stephen. That'd be amazing. Amy, you would know more about the odds of that than I would.
And Amy, why don't we get to that and also throw this question in from Jesse Lynn. This is interesting. In the 8 years, one thing that has changed is Alec Murdoch is now behind bars, and she says people may talk. Do you agree with that?
I do. I do think that I do think that family still carries a lot of weight, and there are a lot more tentacles than just Alec. That's the problem. It's not like you can walk out the door one day and just start toodalooing, everybody's dirty laundry because he wasn't the source of the problem. This was familial, generational, and this family was very well connected. so I don't think that just putting Alec behind bars would give somebody the confidence to do that. And as far as using state grand juries, it's just it's done so differently. Things are done so differently down here. And again, that's the side of the wall that I've never been on and I won't be on, but I've read a lot of the transcripts. I've read all the state grand jury testimony and transcripts in this case and all these cases actually. And from the financial to the roadside to the drugs to the money to the murders, I've read them all. And I tell you, it's there are a lot of people whose names haven't been released that did some testifying that know a lot more. And, I guess that's the frustrating thing is that when people want to say, oh, well, this is going to, open up, shine, as Mandy likes to say, shine sunshine on, the deep, dark secrets. But the problem is that it's not really getting to it. Like Sarah said earlier, there's, a lot more to come. I think a lot more that we don't know about. And, I'm hopeful that they start seeing the benefits of, like you said, Steve, maybe start offering some immunity to people. Who knows how it's going to go.
And Leah Baker, who's been following this, I guess, this press conference, Mark Hill believes that Hampton County will now feel comfortable talking. So that is, according to her, coming from the head of SLED. Harold Dull, a friend of the show. No oxy for me, only surviving the survivor, my only addiction. Love to hear that. You will not die from this. Might come close, but you're not going to die. So, Michael, to you, Buster Murdaugh obviously hit his threshold yesterday, put out a statement regarding his connection to Stephen Smith, and said that he tried to, and I quote here, to ignore the vicious rumors about my involvement in Stephen Smith's traffic death that continue to be published in the media as I grieve over the brutal murders of my mother and brother. These baseless rumors of my involvement with Stephen and his death are false. I unequivocally deny any involvement in his death, and my heart goes out to the Smith family. What did you make of that when you saw that statement cross your desk?
It's clear that Buster and his girlfriend and the family have been through a lot. It's clear that Buster and his girlfriend have had enough of the media, for lack of a better word, the paparazzi. He's become kind of an unwilling celebrity in all of this. People are taking pictures through windows and getting pictures of him taking out his trash. And so, yeah, I think this is in light of the alleged harassment by certain members of the press. This has probably helped propel this statement, but I'm curious as to why he didn't offer a statement anytime over the past 8 years. I mean, in the days and weeks after Stephen died, just as soon as we knew who it was, we started hearing these rumors all over Hampton County. Nobody came forward and addressed these rumors then. After the boat crash, Stephen's case was brought back to the public light. Nobody in the Murdoch family, Buster, nobody addressed these rumors then. Nobody reached out and extended their condolences to the Beach family, to the Smith family, to anybody. Their tactic was, hide behind your legal representation, and we're going to win this thing in court. And so it is, I do feel for Buster. We have no direct evidence that he has committed any crime. I know he's been harassed, and I think that the two people who have suffered so much in this are Sandy Smith, because she lost a son and has no answers, and Buster has suffered. He has lost, even though his father's still alive, he's lost his whole family, and he wears a disgraced name. Even his nickname now has a stigma attached to it. all the crimes of Buster Murdaugh, his great grandfather, going back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, have been brought to light. He wears a disgraced name. His family is either dead or in jail, and he's been through a lot. So we do have to give him some empathy and some sympathy. But I am curious as to why you're finally speaking out now, and why not at any point in time over the last 8 years.
And that's an interesting point. So, Sarah, to you deal with victims, particularly victims of domestic violence. You can argue that Buster Murdaugh is a victim in his own right, having gone through what he just went through. But at the same time, as Michael just mentioned, they've been silent all these years up until now. How do you negotiate that? And how do you think the public should be treating Buster Murdaugh?
I've said from the very beginning, under South Carolina law, Buster is a crime victim. He has constitutional rights that should be protected. He has constitutional rights that he can try to assert. I don't know that he's done that, but there should be protections for him. Just because you're a victim does not mean you have to endure harassment or stalking or any of these things that are happening. And he's very clearly a victim under South Carolina law. I think the timing of the press release from Buster, very curious. I think it was about 30 minutes before the Sandy Smith press conference. But I look at these as two separate cases. I know that there's so much that people want to just try to weave through rumor and speculation and conjecture. But, Buster is a victim in the case in which his mother and brother were murdered. Sandy Smith is the victim in the case in which her son was murdered. And I think that we've got to look at those very separately, very differently, until the evidence tells us otherwise. If and when the evidence shows us that there is overlap there, and I know that, SLED came out a year or two ago or whenever it was that they reopened the Stephen Smith case, and that's kind of where all, the wheels started to run off with people just rolling with trying to pull Buster's name into this. But, if there's evidence, then we will hear it. But until there is, people need to leave him alone, leave Buster alone. And quite frankly, need to leave Sandy Smith alone. She's been getting a lot of heat as to what she's actually going to do with this money. A lot of speculation about that, as far as how she's going to spend the money that's been raised with the GoFundMe. That's really disgusting. She is a grieving mother. She's just looking for hope and looking for answers for her son and for her family. So we'll see.
And Sarah Ford with a very reasonable approach. Maria Gutierrez writes, I feel sorry for Buster. People need to leave him alone. Let law enforcement do their job. But then it's followed by this comment, Amy Z. I think Buster was getting crap, I could use another word, for befriending Stephen. The Murdochs don't put up with a stain on the family name. They're involved, in my opinion. So there's always going to be people out there who are suspicious and, and believe that there could be more sinister intentions. What are your thoughts on Buster Murdaugh, and how should the public be treating him right now?
I mean, I agree with Sarah. I do think he is an absolute victim. Whatever personal run-ins I've had with him, I think come from a place of just fear and overwhelming, I see this a lot in criminal cases. I liken it to criminal defense. To criminal defense and criminal defendants is, people hear or read something on the news that's not been properly vetted or is just based in rumors. And I think it affects a lot of accused people, as well as certainly in this case, in Buster's situation. I do, absolutely believe he is a victim, along with Sandy and anybody who's lost people. And just it really blows my mind, that the media, or I guess people pretending to be the media, or where, I'm not quite sure who these people are, whether they're just, actual investigative reporters or just people pretending to be sleuths or whatever. But, the invasion of privacy is is overwhelming. And, I know that his reactions at times in the court, I mean, they almost always had a camera on him as well, either whether he was in the background or they had a whole separate camera on him. And, I know that he got a lot of flack for how he did or didn't react in a certain way. And I think it's just human nature for people to want to do that, but there's just no way to know what's going through that poor kid's head. And I say kid, I mean, he's not even 30 yet. And, you look at the life and the leadership that he has had vis-a-vis his dad and grandfather, and the trouble that has come along with that, and it's just I can't say what a normal reaction would be to that. It's very sad. And I hate it. I do hate it for him.
Jen writes, Sandy Smith said, in regards to what Sarah Ford just said, she wants to create a scholarship with the extra funds, followed by this Mel. Do you really think Buster is being stalked and harassed? Yelling, what did you do to Steven in a public place is rude and may have hurt his feelings, but I think he's probably exaggerating. So there's always going to be this, I don't know, not the same level of empathy towards a family like this. I don't think that maybe others might get. Jennifer writes, Buster could just be numb with feelings after such a trauma and dealing with his father. One quick thing that I want to also get to, and then we'll get some closing thoughts. And Michael, if you could address this. Jim Griffin's back in the news, and he's not a happy camper because some conversations got out between him and Alec from jail. He confirmed attorney Jim Griffin saying, yeah, that's me, and I'm mad as hell. He told Fox News Digital. Other questions I have are who else had access and listened to those calls. You can tell from the clip we were absolutely talking about trial strategy. What about the fact that this has become such a media spectacle that now some calls which go under attorney-client privilege have been released publicly to a podcast and elsewhere?
I haven't been following that particular story that closely, but I'm not surprised. I mean, the jail conversations of Alex were publicized earlier in the Alvin Glenn Detention Center. Even his shopping list was publicized. We know what he bought, what mayonnaise he bought. We know his size underwear. So I'm not at all surprised. And I think that, obviously if it was a client attorney privilege, I think somebody made a mistake, but I'll pass this on to someone else because I haven't been following it that close.
Anyone else want to take that up? Sarah Ford, maybe? Amy Z?
Joel, sorry. Yeah. I want to interject just because, I saw something on, I give myself about 20 minutes every 4 hours to just veg out. And usually that means like scrolling Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. And this round happened to be TikTok earlier in the day. And there was somebody on there who said, if the prosecution had this, that's an automatic mistrial. Well, and there were so many things again that just weren't complete in what he was presenting to the, in his TikTok. But that call was released as a result of a FOIA from a member of the media or someone that was doing a podcast. That's not something that the state ever looked for, asked for, any of that. And I know it sounds like I'm defending the state, which I never do, but what I'm defending is the honor of lawyers. One thing that I do really appreciate is even when I was dealing with the Attorney General's office and it's still dealing with them, they're very careful to not have anybody that's involved in these prosecutions even screen those calls. It's a paralegal from another division of the Attorney General's office. So there's no chance that they would get that information. And I believe that I read an apology from the Colleton County Sheriff's Department saying that they were supposed to have screened, which calls were protected and that they simply made a mistake. you know, what's frustrating to me is that, you know, anybody knows that that's Jim's voice. We've listened to him for multiple, not just 6 weeks in a row, but, you know, lots of times before that. And anybody knows that would be Jim's voice. And so it's frustrating again, you know, to have somebody in the media take that and just put it out there just because they can. And it's just incredibly frustrating. I think it thwarts the system. Sure, it gives us some voyeurism and insight into, you know, what a client and an attorney were thinking of during trial. But, you know, if we as a nation can't honor, you know, the rules, I just think it really makes it challenging for victims, for defendants, for anyone to get true justice. And I just don't think it's right.
Good point. Valid point. The chief marketing officer has put this here. Listen on audio platforms, ? Please rate our episodes and write a review. Give 5 stars if you like what you hear. We would greatly appreciate that. We are trying to get our audio numbers on par with our YouTube numbers. It's like a swing. One goes one way and then it goes the other way. Michael DeWitt, I bet you didn't know that Solicitor Randolph was part of SDS Nation. From the grave, he says, you all know there's no evidence tying Buster to Stephen. Maybe I can introduce you to after the show if you want to get a scoop. But Steve
That's
Peterson.
my photo.
Say that
interesting. Again. The photo that's with that comment is a photo I took during an interview in 2018. So that's kind of funny.
Well, Solicitor Randolph, you need to be paying Michael DeWitt for that photo. Solicitor Randolph, how dare you? Steve Peterson, the man with that funny Boston accent who says the word wicked, loves the Boston Bruins. He was a senior special agent with the United States Department of Justice, the Drug Enforcement Administration, otherwise known as the DEA. He was the most senior DEA agent in the world at the time of his retirement, which he'll tell you means he was the oldest person on the streets. He's now a South Carolina private investigator. Doing it, you heard.
I'm not a private investigator. I am not. I am just a guy who asks questions.
That is it.
That's all I am.
A man who asks questions, and I'll ask you a question. Where does this Stephen Smith saga go from here, especially in light of the fact that we just heard that the head of SLED is saying that this was a murder? Where does it turn next?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to say better late.
What good are you? Then what good are you?
Yeah, well, I'm not very good. Nobody's in jail yet. And that was my goal. And I was unsuccessful in completing my goal. I believe I'm accurate in my theories with them. I've provided all of that information to SLED. I gave them all everything that I uncovered. I gave to them typically on the day I uncovered it. And I hope they can make something of it. I have no idea what they did once we parted ways. But, you know, when I spoke to Sandy many times over the past, well, since I met her almost 2 years ago now, just after Paul and Maggie's death, you know, I would ask her every time I would meet her, have you heard anything? Has anybody contacted you? Have you heard anything new? Has any new leads come up? And she would tell me the same thing. She would say, no, nobody's called me. Nobody said anything. And because of the Netflix show that came out, Netflix is getting some leads. People are calling in with information. They're forwarding those leads to me. I have been investigating and looking into them. When there's something of value that comes out of that, I will forward it to Sandy. I've tried to contact SLED before and give them some information, but they didn't call me back or didn't text me back. I can only offer so much. And if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. But I'm not looking for credit on anything. I just want Sandy to get some closure. Hell, I've been there, done that. I have that T-shirt. I don't need any more crap.
It's a great point. I mean, it's all about Sandy Smith. It's all about getting that closure for her son, Stephen Smith. Meanwhile, Amy Zimmercheck, she is the owner of the AJZ law firm, LLC, focusing on criminal defense. If you guys don't know, when she was talking about taking a break to scroll on TikTok, that's because she works like 18 hours or 21 hours a day. I just don't know how she does it. She's been voted a member of Super Lawyers continuously since 2019. She's had over 10 not guilties on felony cases, including murder and rape since 2009. Do you keep that pace up on the weekend as well, Amy Z? Do you work through the weekends?
It depends if I have a trial or not. But this weekend I did not. And I can tell you that Sunday I met my family for lunch and then came back home to take a nap. It was an early lunch, came back home, taken up, and woke up at 5:30, and I thought it was 5:30 the next morning. So no, I definitely try to use my non-trial weekends to be able to sleep.
Your closing thoughts. It could be on anything. It could be on Sarah Ford's floral blouse. It could be on Steve Peterson's grandfather clock, or as it relates to Murdoch.
Well, Sarah and I went to law school together, so I've been admiring her wardrobe for years. But you know, in some ways, I'm kind of I'm exhausted, you know, with the topics of this case, because not of this podcast, but I mean of this case, just because I feel like right now we're kind of in a hamster wheel, you know, and I really wish that we could, you know, move forward. I think, you know, SLED needs to, you know, they're making steps maybe now, you know, coming out and saying that it's a, you know, that they believe it's a homicide, things like that. I think that, you know, I think that they need to really start moving forward and to really kind of expand the investigation. Like Sarah said earlier, you know, I think there's a lot more to uncover. You know, I think that there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. And I just hope that what comes out of this is good. I hope that it's good for justice. You know, I keep reading comments where it says, oh, lawyers are all snakes and lawyers are all bad. And it breaks my heart. One of the reasons that I work so hard and advocate, you know, for people, and that's what I do. You know, I don't advocate to free criminals or to, you know, I advocate for the Constitution and I advocate for justice. And, you know, and I just hope that the people like Eric, you know, and that are, I think, a small group of us, we really want it to be, and I think it's probably a bigger group than I think, you know, but I really think that we want something positive to come out of this, whether it's answers, whether it's, you know, respect again for the legal profession, whether it's all of those things. I just hope that something good comes out of this.
Carolyn A. writes, nothing would have happened in investigating Stephen Smith's murder had Alec Murdoch not been exposed. That should tell you everything. Followed by Linda in Texas, a hit-and-run death is a murder. Why didn't they investigate it further? Sarah Ford, she served as legal director at the South Carolina Victim Assistance Network since 2017. She leads a team of attorneys and advocates to provide direct legal services to South Carolina crime victims. She's also a former South Carolina prosecutor and host of Palmetto Prime Time, one of the hottest podcasts in all the world. Sarah, your closing thoughts today.
Well, thank you for that, Joel, and thanks for having me on. And it's TJ Maxx, Amy. I'm a nonprofit lawyer, so I shop a lot at TJ Maxx. You know, I've said it a gazillion times. I want justice for everyone involved here. You know, I wanted justice for Maggie and Paul Murdoch. You know, I want justice for Stephen Smith and his mom, Sandy Smith, and their family. You know, there are constitutional rights that Sandy can assert, including the right for law enforcement to give them access to documents related to the case. That's a constitutional right. You just have to assert that right. I hope that they will do that and they will honor that, because she deserves that, especially after 8 years of trying to get answers for her son, and not having those. I'm also discouraged, Amy, at least for a second, when I see those comments about lawyers, because there are a lot of really great lawyers out there. I think that the majority of lawyers are good, and there are a few that give us a really bad reputation or bad name. But it's the honor of my lifetime to be a lawyer, to stand for justice, to fight for victims. I've represented defendants. It is truly the most. I can't imagine doing anything else. And so, anything that Eric Bland can do and Ronnie Richter and those folks can do to try to bring some justice for Stephen Smith, I totally support. But also, I think that we got to just buckle up, because this is not over. It's not over. I know we're in a hamster wheel, but we've got some things coming up, and we've just got to be prepared for it. So
Lisa writes, "Hey, y'all. Met some of the nicest people covering this case, and I started to say y'all, which I love." John Shepard, "All roads lead back to the Murdochs." That is still the sentiment among so many. Our guest of honor today, Hampton County native Michael M. DeWitt Jr. He's a multiple award-winning journalist and longtime editor of the 143-year-old the Hampton County Guardian. His on-the-ground coverage of the Murdoch crime saga has been published in print and online around Gannett's nationwide USA Today network, and he's appeared on ABC's 2020, CBS's 48 Hours, Dateline NBC, and Netflix documentaries to discuss the case. Michael, where do we go from here?
I agree with Amy. There's a whole lot to unravel yet. This case is far from over. I don't know. There's so many things to talk about, so many things to consider. When you mention all the TV programs and everything that I've been on, I was like a lot of Hampton County people when this first started. I tried to avoid all of this. I turned down interview after interview. I turned down court TV. I turned down national networks, and I did my job. I wrote the stories. I covered this case, but I tried to avoid this national exposure. But I changed my mind after a little persuasion by my company, because it was brought to my attention that nobody could tell our story like we could. And that's what I've been trying to do, is tell the Hampton County and the Low Country story. And I think it's a story of right now of pain and hurt and betrayal. It's a tragedy for the Murdoch family. It's a tragedy for the Beach family, the Smith family. But as I've stated in some of my stories, and in as a speaker when we announced the Gloria's Gift Foundation, every story has an ending, and not every character in the story is going to get a happy ending. But I'm hopeful that there'll be a lot of positives come from this tragedy. We're going to have, you mentioned the legal community. The legal community is going to reform itself and police itself and try to work harder to spot and eliminate these bad apples. I think the banking system in our area has been forced to take a hard look. If we don't want to pay millions of dollars and be exposed to criminal liability, we've got to make sure this doesn't happen again. The boat crash there's no stronger testament to the dangers of underage drinking than that boat crash. There are a lot of moral lessons to be learned throughout this thing. One positive I take from Stephen Smith's story is what it's done for the gay community. The gay, I don't know the proper, LGBTQ. I don't want to be politically incorrect, but to be different in a small town is not an easy thing to do. And this has brought attention to this young man and his life, and the community, the gay community rallied around Stephen and his mother. And I think that's a positive outcome. Whether they all get answers and justice in the form of an arrest or conviction remains to be seen. But I think in the end, it may be a generation from now, but there will be positives, more and more positives come from this. And when all the blood is washed away and all the pain is eased off, I think that the Low Country and Hampton County will be a better place, and hopefully the state of South Carolina will be in a better place.
Well said.
Eloquently said, 100%. And are you working on the book already, Michael? The post-trial book?
I just finished one book, and I'm trying my best to finish the Fall of the House of Murdoch. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Imagine telling a story with so many angles, so many chapters, so many characters. Wish me luck. Pray for me.
It's challenging. Let's all pray for Michael, please. Andy School, friend of the show, writes, great show again, STS. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Steve Cohen. Thanks, Joel's boss wife. Followed here by Lisa, who says, TJ Maxx rocks. And Sarah Ford giving the thumbs up on that. Quick programming note. We have an amazing show tomorrow night. You definitely do not want to miss it. It sounds like a news cliche right there, but it is the truth. We have Jody Plowshay on the program. In 1984, he was being sexually assaulted, victimized by his martial arts teacher. I believe he was abducted. The martial arts teacher was apprehended, brought back to an airport in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There were news crews there to capture the perpetrator's return. Another person who was there that no one knew was Jody Plowshay's father, Gary Plowshay, and he shot and killed the perpetrator as news crews were rolling. It was the most watched murder ever at that time, with over 20 million people seeing it on the television. And tomorrow night, Jody Plowshay is our guest, and he's being interviewed by Doctors Ann Burgess and Dr. Gary Bricado, and of course is famous. The show Netflix Mindhunter was loosely based off of her work, and she will be doing the interview with Gary Bricado. So please tune in for that. And then later in the week, we'll do our Great Scott. It's your True Crime Phil live on Friday, I believe at 12:30 Eastern, and then back live with my mother who's moving around, 7 p.m. Eastern, Sunday night. Until then, love you, America. Love you, South Carolina.